Okay. I've tried to tell this story, I don't know how many times. Tried to write a fictional account of it because there were some things in there I didn't want to divulge the real names of the people involved. But I, I guess I've come to the point where I'm just going to tell it straight. Um, we went to Venice because when we bought our house in that little village in the east of France, it turned out that we didn't have the proper papers to stay in France, and we did not want to go back to the US and get them. Um, it looked complicated. We tried to get help from the mayor of the village, and he did have a lot of relationships with senators and people like that, and nobody would budge. Um, every week, the gendarmes would come visit us and ask us for the proper documents. I had lived in France since the early 60s, off and on, never had to have anything more than a passport. But things have changed, things had changed, and there we were in that situation. So one day the gendarmes showed up. These were kids, they were in their 20s with their crisp uniforms and their gentle manner. They were not rude or unpleasant. They were just insisting we have the right documents to stay in France. And we didn't have it, and we weren't going to be able to get it. Um, so one day they showed up and they said, we're going to come next week, take you to the airport, and send you back to Texas. And I just said, don't bother, we're leaving. And we had figured out that we could go to Venice, where we had developed some relationships, and that worked. We packed up our suitcases, we put our cat in a cat carrier, and we drove over the Alps, it, down from the north of Italy, through Milano, and got on the autoroute and drove to Venice, parked the car in the car park, went to a hotel, and started looking for an apartment. And we finally found one on Dorsoduro, and it was an acceptable place, a place we thought we could help. We could do some arranging. You basically needed furniture. The furniture was decrepit, but it was in a very good location. And we ended up staying 3 years. Um, we learned Italian. We developed relationships. We loved the food and wine. We loved the town itself. We didn't actually, we weren't so enchanted by the huge crowds that got off the ships and swamped the town, and neither were the native Venetians. They put up with it because the people spent money, but They clogged up the streets. They didn't speak Italian. They expected everybody to speak English. They would come in asking, "Where's San Marco Square?" And um, the impatient Italians would say, "Piazza San Marco," uh, and say, basically tell them in Italian the signs were everywhere, but they were not in English. Um, it turned out to be a good life, and we actually considered staying there. It was a labyrinthian town. I mean, all these little streets and bridges, and there were whole parts of that town that the tourists never saw. Very easy to get lost. But Cynthia's, she has an infallible sense of direction. She's got these maps in her mind. She never gets lost. So that was a that was an enchanted time. The kids, two of the kids came with us, Katie and Andy, and um, it was only a two-bedroom place with terrible beds, but we turned an alcove into a third bedroom. We I actually went back to our house in France and got a lot of furniture and got the a local friend who's a carpenter, furniture maker, whose parents were Italian, um, and he had grown up in that part of France. So he was Italian extraction, but French. And we packed up his van with beds and a couch and kitchen stuff and various things. And we did have a bit of an issue going through Switzerland, and they wouldn't let us drive through with all that stuff. It's interesting to me that when we left France, we turned over all our furniture to an Italian, a Venetian mover, who came through without the slightest problem. I'm sure he knew a secret route. In any case, we got into Venice, got all that stuff into the apartment, and I remember it as an enchanted time. Um, we had a lot to learn about Italian ways. We made mistakes, but our Italian got better and better, and we developed friends. Um, I remember one little incident. It was just as an illustration of the difference between American ways and Italian ways. We were sitting in a park. I guess it was a park. It was um, in the midst of a lot of chateaus and houses. And we saw a friend who had a hotel there, Ruggiero Romanelli, um, showed up and was buying flowers from the flower vendor on the corner there. And Cynthia said, "Oh, what beautiful flowers." He didn't hesitate half a second. He gave her those flowers and turned straight to the man and ordered another bunch. And what we realize is if you compliment something in Italy, they just give it to you. So you have to be very careful about that. Um, in any case, after 3 years, we finally got our papers in order. We flew to Houston. Um, there were no hangups. We got everything that we were supposed to have, took it to the embassy, had everything stamped and approved, and flew back. And then we had a very short time to get out of Venice and go back to France. And it was kind of difficult to leave, actually. But we had bought that house. It needed a tremendous amount of work. The kids were, Andy was already in school in Paris. There were a lot of reasons why we needed to go back, and I felt responsible for that house. It couldn't just sit there. So we went back and we made a life there. We lived there over 20 years. Um, that house became a silk purse, basically. It started out as a house that needed a lot of help. It had a leaky roof. It had um, barely heated. It had no kitchen. Um, it it really needed everything. And now it is a primo place owned by a celebrity chef who has continued the work that we did. The work on the main house, he pretty much left the way it was, but the part that we built into the barn, all those new rooms and so on, and the gym that I had, he turned into an apartment. So I don't know. They probably have 10 or 12 bathrooms. They have 6 rooms, just rooms to rent, and then they have 2 or 3 apartments. Um, and they have a swimming pool, something we always wanted and couldn't figure out how to do. Anyway, that house evidently, once it started to regain its liveliness and its allure, really got the bit between its teeth and hasn't stopped yet. It's now a beautiful place with a tremendous chef working there. I think that it changed the village. The village didn't have, as a matter of fact, the Franche-Comté didn't have anything like that, not at that caliber. The place that he had worked, the chef, was a grand chateau, and the cuisine was 4-star stuff, but that took a multi-million-dollar investment from Swiss investment group. This was done by us, and then he picked up the I don't know how you say that in English. Um, he he took it from there, and um, it is now a place. The house was what's called a maison de maître, and as it's not a chateau, but it is one level down from a chateau, and and frankly, I would prefer that than owning a chateau. Owning a chateau means the government has a lot of control over what you do. In any case, I'm going to stop talking about that, but I wanted to go through the experience of Venice just to make a record of it. It was an enchanting time.